window,
All right.
kind of facing
Perfect.
sideways, then the camera can see them also.
Great question.
That was my thinking.
Yeah.
Tyler.
Here are the posters.
Okay, everyone, we're going to start in a few minutes. We're currently one short of a quorum, and we had two aldermen who were running a bit late. So we will let you know when we're ready to start.
So here's the asterisk. I was not in a position where I was paying someone.
Obviously, all that I love this. Yep.
Well, nice to meet you.
Sure.
Awesome. I know it's been a while since I signed a business license.
Yeah, well, yeah, you work with that.
Yes.
Certainly from our team, yes.
Students, colleagues, I don't know if you're
Very, I'm
Nice to
sorry.
meet you.
I'm sorry every time you have a chance. Obviously, thank you as well.
For license, for license.
Okay, as long as I are discussion, and I'm good.
It's called, no, it's not.
Yep.
They're taking all that license.
Appreciate it. Please, you ready to golf?
Oh, yeah, we're good. We're all good.
Obviously glad that today is tonight, and obviously it makes it a little easier to go for the future. We don't iron out whatever wrinkles, whatever. Be honest, nobody, no one's going to. Of having future development sort of, and so this is going to be an evaluation. Take what is our existing process, try to make sure we're updating it, right? We're some securities and protections for our team, and as are you, right? And make sure it's for my clients. And obviously, middle. Real sharp guy, lawyer. So, you're great. No, you're fantastic.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, you're fantastic. We appreciate you.
Okay.
I get trained with getting you late. No, we're shooting shit. It's fantastic.
Okay.
All right. Well, we're good.
Yeah, we're good.
Mayor should be coming in a minute. Fourth board should come apparently later. Fourth board, Victor. Oh, got it. Right. And all the feelings. Just fine, right? Like,
Okay, everyone.
just shut your fucking brain down. Shut your mouth.
Tom Maylard,
Yes, sir.
when the hand goes up, that was a camp counselor thing. The hand goes up, the mouth goes shut. Sorry. Obviously, I have a teenager. All right, everyone, welcome to a special meeting of the Waukegan City Council. Tonight, on May 23rd, the time is 6:13. I'm going to call the roll, and then I'm going to ask for a motion to appoint a temporary chair. Alderman Bolton, absent. Alderman Guzman, absent. Alderman Martinez.
Here.
Alderman Felix, absent. Alderman Newsom.
Present.
Alderman Turner.
Present.
Alderman Donnerworth.
Present.
Alderman Florian.
Present.
Alderman Hayes.
Present.
Mayor Taylor, absent. We have a quorum. So could I have a motion to elect a temporary chair? And Alderman Newsom has very graciously volunteered to take on that role.
So move.
First from Martinez,
Second.
second from Florian. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes.
All right, we'll go on to item 2, audience time. Is there anyone in the audience that wants to speak on anything that is on the agenda for tonight?
Mr. Edwards, I'll be your timekeeper tonight. Let me just pull up my timer. Whenever you're ready.
Good evening, everyone. I was shocked to learn that there was a meeting tonight, but as I went on to the website and I looked at the board docs, and I want to talk specifically about those things there, right? I think it's a beautiful thing what we're trying to do to downtown Waukegan, but I have a concern, right? And as somebody that's a part of the gay community, that number 2 theme where it say the LGBTQ community exclusive, I'm concerned about that language. I'm not okay with that, and I hope I get some clarification tonight, because once again, we're separating groups of people, right? And as somebody that represents that community, when I go in spaces, I don't like to be treated differently. You know what I mean? And so that language right there has me concerned. Is we, making those units specifically for them? Because I've never known nobody to be turned away for housing because of their sexual orientation. I haven't seen no big old thing about that. So again, I hope I get some clarification about that tonight, and I hope you guys will find that a little bit of concerning too. For it to be like that, you didn't have to put those, you know what I mean? It could have just been apartments. It's building it up. The city is full of everybody. And we got to stop grouping people and separating people, because all of us have a right to be treated equally, no matter what color you is, sexual orientation, none of that should matter. We're all people. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Edwards.
Is there anyone else that wants to speak? Okay, we'll move on to item 3, information and discussion. Item A, TIF 101, tax increment financing as a development tool in Waukegan. Who's going to do the presentation on that?
Okay, so I'm going to do a quick intro if I could, and then my colleague Greg Smith is going to proceed. So tonight, we called this special meeting to discuss 2 interrelated topics. Tax increment financing, which is a tool for encouraging economic development, and then also the specific development proposal from the Waukegan Community Development Partnership, which is a private group of developers who have come with a vision of how they would like to revitalize the downtown area, specifically the Genesee Street corridor. The reason that we're doing the first presentation is that it's important to understand tax increment financing to really understand the scope and impact of the developer's presentation. The developer's presentation is very ambitious. It's also asking for significant public assistance. Greg Smith from my office is one of the leading experts in the state on tax increment financing. It is one of the most commonly used economic development tools in the state, and in fact nationwide. And I think it's also one of the least understood. It is been touted as a way to get public financing for private projects without raising taxes. It does have an impact on surrounding taxing districts, which Greg is going to talk about, but really seeks to kind of mitigate that. It does not apply a special new tax to any particular area the way a special service area or a special assessment would. And it does provide a lot of flexibility for governments to support economic activity. So as I said, Greg Smith from Elrod Friedman will be presenting on tax increment financing. Probably going to be about a 25 to 30 minute presentation. There'll be opportunities for the City Council to ask questions about that. And then we have, from the developer, we have a whole group. The principal representatives are Sam Yingling and Lil Jaffe. They brought also a number of their partners here tonight. And one of the things I want to emphasize for the members of the public is that no actions will be taken by the council tonight. No developments will be approved, no financing will be approved. This is strictly for discussion, and what we really want to get a sense of is how this fits in with your view of how Waukegan can redevelop its downtown. And one of the other, there's going to be one other component that we are going to drag Noel up here to give some history of the city's use of TIF. There have been, I think there are 11 TIFs total. Not all, most of them are, the majority of them are not active anymore. But she's going to go through a brief history of how the city has used TIF, and then also a brief history of the city's work to come up with a coherent development plan for downtown. I want to thank everybody tonight, and we're going to try and keep this presentation tight, and we're going to try and make sure it's not too dry, but if you have questions, let us know. Great. Greg, with that, take it away.
Okay, thank you very much, Stu. Thank you, Council, for having me this evening. Look forward to speaking with you about these issues, and Stu and I will be able to answer whatever questions you might have. Could please go to the next slide. So this presentation is going to answer three groups of questions. First, what is tax increment financing, abbreviated as TIF, and what is its purpose? Second, how are TIF districts created, and how does TIF impact other taxing districts? Third and finally, how are TIF revenues restricted? They are restricted heavily under state law, and what special regulatory requirements apply when a TIF district is created. After we go through all these materials, Noel will come up and present on the history of the city's TIF districts, as Stu mentioned, and also summarize the city's existing administrative policy on the use of TIF incentives. If you could please go to the next slide. What is tax increment financing and what is its purpose? Per state law, this is a tool that is created by state law. It empowers municipalities like the city to engage in meaningful economic development within targeted geographies supported by special revenues. So a TIF district is a portion of the city which the council finds qualifies as a TIF district under state law. If that's done, then special revenues are set aside for the city to use on redevelopment projects. We'll be discussing all the requirements and mechanisms involved with that, but the purpose here is economic development. And simply put, economic development is the city council deciding how to enact its policy goals in terms of land use development. What kind of developments does the city council believe are most important and therefore deserving of a public-private partnership through the sharing of tax revenues to accelerate those projects where the market is otherwise not bringing them to fruition. Specific purposes stated in the TIF Act include protecting the health, safety, morals, and welfare of the public. Economic development is an exercise of protecting those things. Even though we typically think of that as part of the police power, economic development falls within it. Eradicating blight in conserving areas, importantly, before they become blighted is a purpose under the TIF Act, and then redeveloping these areas. Go to the next slide, please. Some basics on TIF districts and tax increment financing. As I mentioned, if a TIF district has been created by the city now has a special revenue source to assist with funding both public improvements, streets, utilities, and other public buildings and things of that nature, and private redevelopment projects within the boundaries of the TIF district. TIF districts by state law, by standard, last for up to 23 years. That is the length of time that the city receives these special revenues which may be invested in the TIF district for eligible redevelopment project costs. Revenue usage is restricted by state law. I've got a whole slide on that later on in the presentation to talk about what is permissible and what's impermissible. And finally, TIF districts work by redistributing incremental property taxes, meaning additional property taxes that go above the amount of tax received as of the date of creation. So all those new taxes, called increment, go into a special city-controlled fund that may only be used for those restricted purposes. TIF districts do not impose a new tax rate. Stu mentioned this, I'm repeating it because it's important. A TIF district does not involve any additional tax rates. Instead, it involves the capture of the growth in property tax, if any, into a city-controlled redevelopment fund, okay? There is no new tax rate imposed within a TIF district. So if we could please go to the next slide. This graphic, and I'm gonna spend a bit of time here, I think Stu will jump in as well, shows how the TIF mechanism works. When a TIF district is created, we see that purple band on the bottom. It says base assessed valuation. Think of this as the value of all the properties in the TIF district, okay? However much property tax are generated by those properties in the purple is frozen. The school districts, the city, the county, the township, all of the overlapping taxing districts continue to receive as much property tax as they did within the base for the whole duration of the TIF district. This is called the frozen assessed valuation in a TIF. As redevelopment occurs within a TIF district, property values increase, right? As the city incentivizes development, as developers come and do improvements to their properties, the county reassesses them. Their property values increase. The taxes attributable to those improvements over the base are those taxes are then deposited into the city's TIF fund. Those funds may only be reinvested within the TIF district for further redevelopment projects. That is the triangle that you see in light yellow on the screen above the purple base. The idea is that over the 23 years of the life of a TIF district, you have this continual reinvestment of property tax growth back into the TIF, and you have the equivalent of compound interest. You have investment driving investment, which creates more property taxes, which the city continues to use to drive up valuations.
All right, so now we're going to try and explain this graphic in a way that can actually be applied to the area that we're talking about. If you looked at the total property value of downtown Waukegan, over the past 20 years, there has not been significant economic redevelopment in downtown Waukegan. I think that's a fair thing to say. I'm not going to pull out numbers, and I'm not going to, but we have not seen significant economic development, and we have not seen the value of the aggregate value of all that land go up. When you buy a piece of property, you hope that it increases in value over time. That's how Americans tend to save their money, actually. They buy property, and it tends to go up over time. Maybe not as wildly as the stock market, but it's a safe investment that should increase over time. The problem is that when you have property, especially commercial property, that's not generating economic value, it looks a lot like that purple block right there. That purple block on the bottom, think of that as basically the aggregate value of Waukegan's downtown. It's been the same for about 20 years. Maybe it dipped after the 2008 recession, came back up, dipped during COVID, maybe came back up, has tended not to increase because there's not a lot of economic activity that's being driven. And it's going to probably stay that way without things changing. And so that means that that part of the tax base is going to stay about the same. And if we keep our tax rate the same, the amount of taxes that will actually be generated from that will remain about the same. Now, what do we know about prices for everything else that are happening right now? Anybody bought eggs in the past 4 years? Yeah, everything is going up. So if your tax base is flat, your tax rate is flat, and no economic development is happening, the same amount of money is basically just going to be generated. What TIF does is it says, okay, past a certain point, we're going to start creating a special fund where if you invest in this specific area, anything extra, anything new, you build a new building, the value of that new building that is created and the taxes on that will go into this special fund. And that can accrue over time. And what you can do is you can reimburse if you're putting in new streets, if you're putting in new planters, you can use that increment specifically to reimburse that specific area. It doesn't go into the general fund. It doesn't go, it can't be spent in any other ward, really. The idea is that it stays in the TIF, and the TIF, as it increases in value, as there's more buildings, as there's more businesses, as there's more value, the tax base that is generated there stays there. Now, when we say it doesn't hurt the other taxing districts because they are guaranteed the purple box. They're guaranteed everything that they get right now. And after the 23 years, they get to capture everything that's kind of in that orange. The idea is that you create a dedicated account that you can spend just on this particular area. And in some ways, you can borrow against that. So you could, for instance, in the McGaw TIF, which is where Centerpoint was, the city, and Don is here. Don, do you recall off the top of your head the value of the bonds that were issued for the McGaw TIF? Okay, so the city issued $40 million in bonds because they needed to build a lot of infrastructure out for Centerpoint. That required roads, sewers, water, maybe an overpass, I can't remember, but a lot of investment needed to be made there. The city issued $40 million in bonds and has been paying itself back from the increased revenue that is created by Centerpoint. Bridgepoint, sorry, Bridgepoint. Thank you very much. Bridgepoint. In fact, the amount of increment has actually been exceeding our bond payments, which is nice. That means that it was a good investment, and we may be able to pay those off early. So when you do TIF financing, what you always hope is that the value you put in will be able to be paid back by that yellow triangle. And then when that yellow triangle is done, all of the investments you've been put in, whether they're reimbursements, whether someone has borrowed against them, that it's all paid off. And then when the TIF ends, everybody gets to capture the benefit of the orange triangle. The park district, the school districts, and the city itself, and it all goes into their general funds. Greg, did I screw anything up?
It was well said, Stu.
Thanks.
And keep in mind that other than the city, the other affected taxing districts are capped by the property tax cap law, right? They can only increase their property tax levy by the lesser of 5% or CPI each year. So, but at the end of the life of the TIF, they get to jump up and capture all of that dark yellow new growth on the right side of this, in addition to the levy, regardless of the caps. So your park district, the county, the township, they all get to add a significant amount of new property tax revenue to the bottom line that, but for the TIF, would not have been there. That additional value would not have been created, okay? So if we can go to the next slide, please. For those of you who maybe aren't as visual learners, this table here shows the same mechanisms that we were just talking about. On the first line of figures, we have a hypothetical property, actually 3 of them, all worth the same amount, $10,000. They all pay $100 in property taxes in the first year of the TIF. Then at some point in the future, we move over to the second column, current valuation and annual tax. How are these properties performing? Let's just say we're 10 years in. The first property is valued at the same amount. The second one has gone up by 50%. The third one's gone down by 50%. Now, moving over to the third column, tax to affected districts, right? How do we determine that purple bar on the prior slide? Well, the taxing districts still get $100 in property tax receipts from the first property because it maintains the same value. The second property, the taxing districts still get $100 because that is the base. They paid it on year 1, so they still pay it in year 10. On the third property, because the value is down, the taxing districts get less. Then in the third column, how much does the city get deposited into its TIF fund from these properties? Well, in the first case, the property is the same in year 1 as year 10, so there's no increment, right? No growth means nothing's deposited. On the second property, however, there has been a 50% increase, so the city gets its 50%. Note that the affected taxing districts still get their $100 first, and it's only the additional $50 over that amount that comes into the city's fund. Similarly, for the last property that's declined in value, the city's TIF fund doesn't get any increment because the property is worth less. So this helps to demonstrate how the TIF mechanism does protect the other taxing districts with respect to that purple bar that we talked about. Okay, next slide, please. TIF districts are created using a 4 to 6 month process that involves approximately a dozen steps. The TIF Act has a series of procedures that are very technical. We've boiled them down into 3 categories for you, and we're not going to be going through all of the detail here. But the first major task in creating a TIF district is an eligibility determination. We'll be talking about that more in a minute, but just know that the city council must find by adopting an ordinance that this geography, that this area qualifies as blighted, an area in need of conservation, or an industrial park in need of conservation. If the city council makes that determination that the area is eligible, it then undertakes a series of notices and public and affected taxing district input processes. There are mailed notices, there are published notices, a joint review board process is held where other taxing districts come in. I'll talk about that in a little bit. And then in the third step, the city council holds a public hearing to hear in a formal setting from members of the public and other interested parties about their thoughts on the TIF district. The last step in the creation of a TIF is for the council to adopt 3 ordinances. The first one approves something called the TIF redevelopment plan and project. It is the business document, the business plan for the TIF. All of your existing TIFs, which Noel will be talking about in a little bit, have a council-approved business plan. Okay. The second ordinance designates the geography. It approves the map, basically, of the area to which that business plan applies. And then the third ordinance directs the county to undertake that increment generation process, right? Here is the frozen base county. All of the taxes above that, put those in our TIF fund. Upon adoption of those ordinances and filing, you've created your TIF district. Now, this process also applies to TIF district extensions. I mentioned earlier that TIFs are, by state law, limited to 23 years in duration. It is possible, however, to have a TIF district last for up to 35 years in total, or 47 years in total, if the legislature adopts a TIF Act amendment in Springfield, and you then go through this process to amend your TIF district using the same series of 12 steps to create it. Okay. Similarly, if the city were to want to add property to an existing TIF district, you go through that 4 to 6 month 12-step process. Okay, if we could go to the next slide, please. When it comes to an eligibility determination, this is step one, this is critical. It is a prerequisite to creating a TIF district. The city, like all municipalities in Illinois, looking at these districts, will typically hire consultants to determine whether the TIF Act criteria are met. Those consultants will look at data from the county in terms of valuations, historical document review regarding environmental contamination, flooding, the adequacy of utilities, and things like that, and also perform in-person site visits to determine if the area fits within one of these three groupings. Is it blighted? Meaning that it's in very poor condition. I'm using shorthand. Is it a conservation area? Meaning that it's at risk of becoming blighted because the buildings are more than 35 years old on average and things are trending towards blight. Or is it an industrial park conservation area? So if the consultant delivers a report which the council agrees establishes these, and if the council agrees that but for the creation of a TIF district, redevelopment is not anticipated to occur, then the council can move forward with the process to create a TIF district. So this eligibility process is very important, and all of your TIFs have gone through it.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in here because the importance of the eligibility is that TIF is it's a big stick. It is a very powerful tool. And the legislature only wants you to use it in places where it's appropriate. And so when we talk about places where it's appropriate, we talk about blighted. Blighted and conservation are very similar. Basically, conservation means it's on the way to be blighted. Industrial park is a separate issue and was probably what we use for McGaw, I believe. But a blighted area, when they look at it, they say, have property values either stayed the same or decreased over the past 3 to 5 years? Is that the right? Is there old obsolete platting? Are the streets basically a jumble, or do they not allow for the kind of traffic that you want? Is there significant deterioration? Are the facades falling off of buildings? Are there not sufficient utilities for economic development? It's basically looking at this land and saying, economic development can't happen here unless we put some money into it. And that when Greg used the but-for test, that's the legal term for basically saying, ain't nothing going to happen here unless we put some money in. And so that's really the key. And the city has to prepare a study that actually goes through and finds that of the, how many factors are there, 13 or 15?
Yeah, there's 13 for blighted and 15 for conservation areas.
That we have to have a majority of those, we have to hit is it a majority or just have a significant number?
There's different levels depending on which factor you're proceeding under, but it's a substantial amount.
A substantial amount meet those criteria because you don't want to put a TIF district on property that's well developed, that is basically hit the maximum value it's going to get because then it would never pay back. And so these limitations, they're a process that we have to go through to actually determine that this is going to be an effective tool.
That's right. Yeah, thank you. Okay, next slide, please. let's talk about how TIF impacts other taxing districts. So creating or amending a TIF district involves intergovernmental relationships through the Joint Review Board, shortened to the JRB. The Joint Review Board consists of one representative from the city, and then the counties, school districts, park districts, fire protection townships, and a public member. And it's those taxing districts which are affected by the TIF. During the TIF district creation or amendment process, the Joint Review Board meets and renders a recommendation to you, the City Council, on whether or not it should be approved. The JRB only has a recommending role here. There is no veto. So the JRB is given a presentation, typically by city staff and consultants, regarding eligibility and then the suitability of this tool. If the JRB recommends in favor at their first meeting, it's over, and then the matter comes to the City Council for the public hearing that I mentioned shortly before adoption of the ordinances. However, if the Joint Review Board recommends against the proposal to create or amend the TIF district, and then does so a second time, and there's statutory timelines, I won't get into that level of detail tonight, then instead of a majority vote of the City Council to adopt the ordinances creating the TIF, it gets kicked up to a 3/5 majority vote. So the JRB cannot stop a TIF district from being created or amended, but they can increase the vote total for this body to approve those ordinances ultimately.
And Greg, who traditionally sits on the JRB?
It's a city representative, in terms of the city representative.
Just in general, just walk through again. So like the JRBs for Waukegan would include representatives from District 60.
That's right.
For the ones on the west side of town, you'd have the other, oh gosh, I'm forgetting the names of the Warren Township School District.
Right.
You have the
Lake
Park
County
District.
will have a representative on
Yeah.
there as well. That's right. And then a public member. The public member is selected by the Joint Review Board. Typically, the municipality, the city, would bring someone to the meeting to be appointed, but the JRB decides who that person is. Okay. Next slide, please. So the TIF Act also has certain allowances in favor of school districts in particular. Because schools rely primarily on property tax funding to pay their costs to educate, and because that purple bar, the frozen assessed valuation exists, the TIF Act has mandatory payments to school districts for student impact fees. As noted here on the slide, if there are TIF-assisted dwellings that generate public school students, then the city must pay up to 40% of the incremental property taxes generated by those assisted dwellings to the school districts to help make up for the gap in their in the cost to educate those students. The TIF Act has formulas and annual timelines for the school districts to make requests and then for the city to vet those requests and make a payout. But just know that the TIF Act includes this significant concession to school districts to try to fill their gap in funding if the city does provide assistance for these residential developments. If there are non-TIF assisted developments within a TIF district that generate students, but they've never received city money, this obligation doesn't exist. It's only where the city has incentivized a residential development that then generates a public school student. The TIF Act also allows the city to partner with affected taxing districts to, for instance, provide surplus TIF revenues. If the city were to agree that some of the revenues in the TIF fund were not needed because you've achieved your goals, the city could agree to send those monies back to the county and have them redistributed pro rata to the affected taxing districts. The city could agree to pay out some or all of a taxing district's increased capital costs incurred because of the TIF district, right? Or for taxing districts otherwise TIF-eligible expenses. So if you have a school district with a building that's in a TIF district and it needs renovation, repairs, or rehabilitation, and if the city were to agree that it would bear a portion of those costs, the city could do so pursuant to an intergovernmental agreement. All in your discretion. Go to the next slide, please. Right, this is the second to last item I'll be talking about. TIF revenues are restricted, as I've mentioned a couple times previously. It's important to note that TIF funds do not go into the city's general account. They are restricted, and as we'll see on the next slide, they're audited annually. okay? So permissible TIF expenditures include studies, like your consultant studies on the front end, professional services, engineers, attorneys, accountants, and so on, marketing costs, property acquisition, remediation, rehabilitation, public works, relocation costs, and intergovernmental capital costs. Importantly, new privately owned buildings are not eligible for TIF funding with regard to vertical construction. That's how we refer to it in the shorthand, except that a portion of new affordable housing buildings may be TIF eligible. But in development pro formas, when a developer lists all of their costs to construct, vertical construction is typically the largest line item there, right? In that, the TIF Act specifically excludes. So just keep in mind that when staff is negotiating development agreements with council direction, that new vertical construction is not permissible, with that one exception for portions of affordable housing.
And one of the reasons is, you think, well, okay, so the biggest line item, actually building a private building, we can't use TIF for that. The idea is that TIF is supposed to take away the impediments that prevent those buildings from being built. There's not good enough utilities. There aren't any utilities at all. The roads are in bad condition. We can't assemble the site because you've got a bunch of property owners who we can't, who won't agree to sell at a price that a developer can attain. All those things that prevent the building from being built, you can spend TIF on. You can basically set the table. You can clear the land. You can do environmental remediation. You can make a property ready to be developed, but you cannot help build the building itself. In most cases, affordable housing is one of the exceptions.
That's right. Okay. Next slide, please. This is the last topic I'll be discussing, which are regulatory requirements for TIF districts. Very briefly, be aware that there is a special audit requirement for TIF funds that have had more than $100,000 of revenue deposited into them. So in addition to the audit of the other village accounts, your TIF funds, once they reach that size, will have an annual audit every year going forward. That includes a review of expenditures by your auditor for compliance with the TIF Act. And then the last item I wanted to mention is that annually, the city must file a TIF report with the Illinois Office of Comptroller that includes statements signed by the mayor and by our office with respect to TIF Act compliance in certain items, specified items of compliance. And then the joint review board that I mentioned meets annually to review the audit, to review the report that's been filed, and the effectiveness in the city's progress towards reaching its goals is stated in the TIF plan.
So just for example, Sherry just sent me our draft TIF reports for this year, and we're going to be setting up a meeting probably in June with the JRB. So if you want to attend a meeting where we look at a bunch of spreadsheets, there will be an annual meeting where we go through every one of the TIF reports to determine and see how money was spent in those TIF districts. Happens every year. It's a public meeting. Everybody's welcome. Hope you like spreadsheets.
Unless there's any questions, I would ask Noelle to step up. Yes.
Thank you. That was very helpful. You mentioned, though, on slide number 11, that new privately owned buildings, except for a portion of affordable housing, are impermissible. Isn't that what this presentation is from these developers tonight, is a privately owned buildings?
So the developers have identified preliminarily some eligible costs that they would like to have reimbursed. It does not include the new vertical construction, to my knowledge. For instance, property acquisition is typically the second largest line item in a developer's pro forma that is TIF eligible. Rehabilitation or renovation of an existing structure is TIF eligible. So if it's an adaptive reuse project, then most of the things that go into that renovation would be eligible.
So they'll let you buy the land you're going to build on, but they won't let you build the building.
Exactly.
Who made these rules? I'm sure our federal government did, but why are they the way they are?
It is part of state law, so it is the Illinois General Assembly that created this legislation. And I believe the policy, as Stu was alluding to, is that it's meant to incentivize new development, but not completely underwrite it. By prohibiting new vertical construction, the city could take the developer to the cusp of doing the thing and building the building, but it's not allowed to pay for the new construction.
So is this an Illinois thing, like, or do other states have this as well?
Almost every other state has some version of tax increment financing.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
It actually started in Texas, I think was one of the first states that widely used it, but it is, like Greg said, almost every state has some form of it, but it is all based in state law. So each state has its own kind of custom version of it.
Question for you. Thank you for the presentation. So it sounds like there's a carve-out for affordable housing. How does that work?
So a portion of affordable housing vertical construction is TIF eligible, and the Act defines what affordable housing means for its own purposes. So it is that allowance is an exception to the general statement in the TIF Act that private vertical construction is not allowed.
Does that mean that if there was going to be, let's say, 15% affordable housing in a new development, then they could use 15% of their vertical costs could be pulled from the TIF?
Yeah, that's a good question. I believe that the TIF Act allows some allocation for the new for the vertical construction associated with affordable housing. I can tell you that in my experience, most municipalities prefer to only consider as reimbursable the expenses that are easily provable and don't require allocation or some type of accounting to arrive at. We'd much rather reimburse a land acquisition cost because we have a closing statement and not get into the minutia of how do we split hairs on those kinds of issues.
That makes sense, but there is some incentive there to include affordable housing in new development that TIF funds could be used for, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
So in the last handful of years, affordable housing was added as an exception to the general rule prohibiting vertical construction being funded with TIF.
Okay, great, thank you.
And just one thing that, I'm trying to, one thing that's important is that when you create a TIF district, it doesn't mean that anyone who builds something in the TIF district automatically gets assistance. All of this is going to be pursuant to individual or kind of an overarching development agreement. So the city is able to pick and choose what types of developments it wants to incentivize. And this is not like a, it's not free money, basically.
Is it the city council that makes that decision, how the TIF funds are going to be allocated, or whom, is that how that works? Okay.
Yes, it does.
So, thank you. So let's say a building is going to be renovated, and the developer comes to the city and says, and this is the question: are they borrowing money from the TIF from the city to renovate their building, which they then pay back once the building becomes occupied and is?
It's up to the city to decide if it gives a grant or if it loans the money and requires repayment of some or all of it.
And you also, I think you mentioned that it could be, and we've used it out at Fountain Square, right, for streets, roads, and all that infrastructure and such. Is that that's also could be a part of this request?
Correct. It's public improvements. The city's own costs, for instance, of enhancing the streetscape or doing utilities or other public improvements are eligible for funding with this mechanism. That's right.
So now the next section of this, Noel's going to do 2 slides, and if we could bring up the second presentation, which I think is called TIF History.
Before you start, Nora, is there someone who can answer what is affordable housing? What does that mean? Is it because every housing can be afforded by someone? So what is affordable housing?
There are state guidelines and federal guidelines that are based on family size and income that define that. They're usually reviewed annually and set out in programs like U.S. Housing and Urban Development Department has guidelines. Illinois Housing Development Authority has guidelines. And they're all based on a combination of family size and household income.
And they're regional.
Yes,
So
based on their...
They're regional. So like what is affordable in Des Moines is different than what's affordable in the Chicago-Kenosha area.
Yes.
Well, they have they use larger aggregate areas. I think is it Chicago,
It's
Elgin,
the Chicago
Gary?
Metropolitan Regional Statistical Area.
Yeah.
So it includes Lake Forest with Waukegan, which is usually a benefit for us that families with higher incomes usually meet those criteria because some of the higher income communities like Lake Forest, Kenilworth, they're in the same statistical area as we are.
Are they required to include affordable housing? Or is that?
No, we're not. There are some established threshold criteria that are goals for communities to meet. Waukegan is well above any of those criteria, so we have no mandates to include affordable housing, other than specific grant programs and things like that, but generally, no.
Okay, and last question. Excuse me. Last question. How much is in the TIF fund now?
How much is in the TIF fund? There are different numbers in different TIFs. Each TIF fund is a separate fund, so in your budget, they're under special revenue funds, starting at Fund 262. Do I have it right? Fund 262 is TIF District number 7? Or is it 260? It is? Okay. And they're the ones that they're subsequent to that in your budget, so 263, 264, et cetera.
All right, got it.
So
Thank
they
you.
have different amounts, but that amount is, what's in those funds is the city's money to use. And I'll touch on how we get to that in just a second. So
Great.
let me talk about
Thank you.
the existing TIFs. Oh, let me jump back to one other question that you had, excuse me. And that was about, eligible uses and not. So one of the ways that I started thinking about it when I was first learning about TIFs is that, if you go back to the redevelopment plan that created the TIF, most of our TIFs, with the exception of TIF 6 that used to exist and no longer does, and our current TIF 11, they were based on the blighted factors. Those were both industrial conservation TIFs. The other TIFs are based on blight. And so if you think about the plan is, the criteria that helped establish the TIF district were blight criteria. And your plan is talking about addressing blight. The way that you address blight primarily is to address the existing buildings that are blighted, that demonstrated that there's blight. So new buildings aren't yet solving what's already blighted. That may or may not help you. It helped me initially to tie those things together. So in addition to those things, when we're looking at evaluating a TIF district, we're also remembering to look at our comprehensive land use plan, which is the guiding document for all of our decisions about what's appropriate and what's not. And of course, our unified development ordinance, we will be. Now it's the zoning ordinance and those others. So history of Waukegan TIFs. We have had 11 TIFs in total. I've listed them there by the names that they were established under. You see that 6 of them were established starting in 1988 and have been closed based on various reasons. Most importantly, they performed what they were supposed to perform generally, and so we closed them. And closing them early before the 23-year expiration allows that revenue that was in that orange bar on the right-hand side of that chart to go back to all the taxing bodies, including the city, in full. So it's beneficial to close them out early if you've accomplished all your goals. Doesn't always happen. You can see that we have 3 current lakefront TIFs. So TIF number 7 is the North Lakefront. TIF number 8, which is the one we're specifically talking about today with regard to what you'll hear from our developers, is the Downtown and Harborfront TIF. And then the South Lakefront TIF, which also goes up onto Sheridan Road and out 10th Street for a little ways. That's TIF number 9. Those were all created in 2013 and currently remain active. Also is TIF number 10, McGaw Park, which is North Point Business Park, that was established in 2014 and is active, and TIF number 11, the new Fountain Square TIF that replaced TIF number 5, was created in 2020. So those are your 5 existing TIFs that are listed in the special revenue section of your budget at the present time. Next slide, please. So we have an administrative TIF policy that dates back to 2011 that was followed by a TIF policy analysis in 2012. There were some different rules then for approvals. There were some extra layers. We had an economic development advisory board and a Renaissance Commission related to downtown. Alderman Newsom's nodding because she sat through any number of those meetings as well. Those bodies no longer exist, so some parts of that analysis no longer apply. But our goals remain pretty steadfast and pretty typical of TIF districts. maximizing the amount of private investment with the term of the investment kept to a minimum. And this is related to that but-for test the gentleman talked about. But for this money being available, this development wouldn't happen. So that you know, there has to be a reason that we're doing this. Another goal is to recapture the public subsidy to a maximum extent after allowing the developer a reasonable return. So we're not trying to keep the developer from making money. That's the business they're in. They want to make money and they want to develop the property, and that's a reasonable expectation of them. But we also want to maximize the public benefit and keep the public investment and public risk to the lowest possible level that still allows the development to proceed. We should use TIF money only when a city development objective is served. So it meets the goals of the comprehensive land use plan. That's a city development document. It talks about our objectives. So it needs to fit the comprehensive land use plan so that it's serving those objectives. Were you going to jump in, Stu?
I was going to do what I always do, which is allow other people to do the substantive work and then do color commentary. I think an important thing here when we talk about, you know, only when a city development objective is served. We could, you know, we could do a TIF incentive to put a giant data center in the middle of downtown for Amazon. That would generate a bunch of tax revenue. It would not fulfill any of our development criteria that we want for downtown. We don't want a big block of a building with no windows that nobody goes in and out of. Maybe we want that in another part of the city. So that would be an example, for instance, of something that might be a great investment, might generate a lot of tax revenue, would not align with what we want in this taxing district. So that's just a kind of that's popped in my head.
I love that you always have good visual examples, like people can picture what that is. Thank you. Another objective of our policy would be to use TIF funds only when it's fiscally prudent and the developer can demonstrate that the development can meet the financial goals and the public purpose commitments of the development. So this is part of the reason Greg talked about us hiring consultants for things. One of the things we do in evaluating TIF projects is to hire a financial consultant that's an expert in this analysis. I do a lot of things well. I do a whole lot of other things less well, but I'm not an expert in financial analysis for a TIF project. I've seen a bunch of them. I've looked at them. I have my own ideas, but I defer to experts on what is in the city's best interest.
Okay, so color commentary here. The city borrowed $40 million for the McGaw TIF, issued $40 million in bond funds. That's a huge borrowing cost. It would not have done that if it didn't know that the investment that it was going to put in was going to be more than sufficient to pay that back, and in fact, that's been the case. But we had to rely on experts to actually make sure that that investment would pay off.
And if I can add to that, the reason that bonds were issued in that case, and they wouldn't normally be in most TIF cases, is because the work that was being done there was infrastructure that was going to become city infrastructure once it was complete, and did in fact become city streets and city sewers and city light poles. So that was the reason for issuing bonds, where that's not something we ordinarily do. Our policy is that we only make available to a project the increment that that project generates. So we look at the parcel numbers, the PIN numbers that the project is on, and only apply the growth in that tax value, that increment in the yellow triangle, that's created by that project. So to Alderman Turner's point about how much money is in there, it doesn't matter how much money is in there, because what's available to the project is only the money that they grow it. Does that make sense? That they grow, the money that they add to the increment fund based on the value of the development, the increase in value from the development. We do that. Our policy is to do only pay-as-you-go reimbursements, meaning we have a redevelopment agreement that says that we will give up to $100, which is up to 50% of your $200 project over this 10-year period. And we will reimburse it once the taxes have been received for that year. So we do the agreement up front. They start, let's say it takes 2 years to build that project. After they pay their first $50 of their $100 bill in June, and then they pay another one in September, after each of those, they can request a reimbursement of that year's share of that funding. That's how we would ordinarily do it. and not do upfront financing or bonds that are a risk to the city generally. There are TIF bonds that exist, so there is a way to do that. But generally, because we have a redevelopment agreement, a developer can usually take that agreement to a lender and monetize it. They can get a loan using that agreement as collateral because there's proof that it will get paid back as long as the project generates the growth in the increment that is intended. And the front-end analysis should be conservative to help make sure that it generates at least as much as it intends to. So the TIF increment that's in the fund, Alderman Turner, the money that's there now, that's intended to be used for city projects. So for example, there's some money in TIF number 8 right now. We have some of that money allocated to the engineering work that's currently being done on our parking garage and the repairs that the engineers are looking at being necessary. The money that's the city's money in there is going to our facility for those repairs so that it's not coming out of the general fund because that's a city facility, city infrastructure in the TIF district. So money from that district can be used for that city infrastructure. So that's the purpose of those extra funds. And then just as a refresher, Greg talked about a little bit, there's a redevelopment agreement that's negotiated with staff and consultants and legal and comes through city council approval, so you have the final say, yes or no, yes but this, those kinds of things. May I answer any questions?
We probably should seat the mayor.
I make a motion to seat the mayor.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Lorian?
So earlier, Stu had showed that, or whoever showed the slide, Mr. Smith, I think, about the tax base of downtown being level. I just wanted to point out that there has been development in downtown, but it's been school, government, you know. And we have a brand-new CLC building, but that doesn't raise the tax base any because they don't pay taxes. The school district took a building off of the tax rolls to refurbish.
Yes.
The county built 3 new buildings, at least 2.
Yeah.
But none of those are taxed.
Yeah, so that table that Greg showed you that had the different values staying the same, going up and going down, we have examples of all of that in TIF District number 8. So some stuff that has stayed the same is, you know, some of the commercial stuff, especially some of the stuff that's been vacant. There haven't been improvements to the building, basically the same stuff. Bay Marine was new construction without a TIF incentive in this TIF district. So the growth and increment from that property is all in the TIF fund. That's our money to fix the parking garage, that kind of thing. Something that's gone down is the school district building that used to be First Midwest Bank. It was on the tax rolls then. The school district bought the building. It came off the tax rolls. Now there's 0 taxes paid on that. So that's one that went down. So we get nothing now from that. So good examples. There's some of everything in this TIF district. Generally, the TIF district is making some money now though. And the base year was 2013, the year that the 3 ordinances creating the TIF district were adopted. So the first year collected increment was 2014.
I just have one more question, sorry. And is most of downtown in the TIF district? I didn't look at the map.
This
but-
particular TIF district goes from our beach. It includes south of Seahorse Drive, comes up here to County Street, and then it jogs across County Street to include the YMCA and goes back to County Street. And then on Washington Street, it comes down here and includes the Karcher Building and goes back to County Street and then goes south. And part of the reason it includes the Karcher Building is because there was a redevelopment agreement for the Karcher Art Space lofts under the prior TIF, and so that was ported over to the new TIF when it was created.
Are they taxed, the Karcher? Really? Okay.
Yes, Karcher is a privately owned building by a development firm out of Minneapolis that specializes in artist lofts.
Okay, I'm finally done, sorry.
Alderman Hayes?
The bullet point number 3 up there talks about the city development objective and making sure that that objective or those objectives are served.
Yes.
Where do we find those objectives? We've seen like the 20-year plans and we know we have the master plan. Is that like kind of the nuts and bolts of the objectives, or is it a case-by-case basis that we make that decision? How does that work?
Great question. So the overarching development objectives are that comprehensive land use plan. And as you recall, that comprehensive land use plan in 2020 adopted all of those subplans, the master plan, the Washington Street Corridor Plan, the River Road Corridor Plan. All of those were adopted as part of the 2020 comprehensive land use plan. That's the guiding document, but then really specific to this TIF district is the redevelopment plan that was one of those ordinances that was passed to create the district. So there's a little more detail in that specific to the district. But generally, in order to pass that plan, we're making sure it fits the comprehensive land use plan. So it's sort of layers of the same onion.
That makes sense. So the development plan that you're referring to, that's actually the document that was used to create the TIF in the first place?
Yes.
Okay.
The TIF 8 redevelopment plan.
I see how it's all connected. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, having no more questions for Noel, we'd like to welcome up the representatives from the Waukegan Community Development Partnership. And Sam, are you going to be kicking it off here?
Yeah, I'll be making the presentation.
Okay, so Mr. England, if you could introduce yourself, the members of your team. We're going to pull up your PowerPoint presentation. And just whenever you need to advance a slide, just say it into the mic, and our advanced AI assistant will do that.
Very good. My name is Sam Yingling. I'm with New Century Real Estate, and I am a member of the Waukegan Community Development Partnership. Can I get the next slide, please? We are a consortium of local developers and industry professionals who have come together to look at the redevelopment of the downtown area here in Waukegan. We're joined by some of our other members, Lowell Jaffe with the Jaffe Family Trust, Mickey Shook with Real Invest, Jeff Schnall with Schnall and Company, Rich Gonzalez from the Metropolitan Housing Development Corporation, and Jacob Meister, who is our legal counsel on real estate matters. To give you a brief background here, we've been meeting with city staff now for a little over a year. And we've studied the plans that, the redevelopment plans and the city's plans for the downtown, and we have, in conjunction with the city staff, put together a plan that we feel meets the objectives of the city in the redevelopment of the downtown. Can we get the next slide, please? So our proposal calls for the creation of 700 new residential units. Within the city's plan, it calls for 1,100 units. We are proposing the creation of 700 new residential units. Along with those units, we're also looking at the creation of about 70,000 square feet of new commercial space. One of the topics that we want to touch on here is the need for additional commercial development in the downtown. There's a lot of potential to add new businesses. There's a lot of potential to further develop existing businesses. One of the challenges that we're facing is that there just aren't bodies in the downtown. There just isn't enough population to support that. And in terms of attracting additional commercial users, one of the obstacles that many new businesses face is just getting through the first 2 years of operations. For many businesses, they lose money for the first 2 years until they become profitable. What we're looking to do is to work with the city to put together an incentive program to help these new businesses incubate and survive the first 2 years so we can further develop the economic base in downtown Waukegan and further develop the tax base. Can we get the next slide, please? So the overall projected cost for the project is a little over $315 million. This would include, we have a map over there of the development zone. We do have a slide on that, but if you just want to reference that in the meantime, there's about 10 unique sites that we've identified within the downtown area. And each site has its own unique circumstances and would require its own unique approach to development and financing. Can I get the next slide, please? One of the great things that Waukegan has going for it is there are so many historic assets in the downtown. There is so much tradition, there is so much potential to restore downtown Waukegan to what it was. You've got great properties like the Waukegan building, the YMCA building, and we'll be talking about the Genesee Corridor and the Courthouse Square Park, which is part of our proposal. Can I get the next slide, please? So what we're looking to do is not only repopulate the downtown with new bodies and create new commercial space to incubate and incentivize retail, local artisans, and also local economic empowerment. We want to create a pedestrian-centric downtown where people are out walking around. They're walking from their apartment to the train, they're walking from their apartment to a local restaurant. One of the problems that I think, one of the challenges that I think the country faces as a whole was, starting back in the 50s and 60s, is that everything became so auto-centric that every place has its own parking garage. Every place has its own designated parking, so someone parks their car, they go into where they're gonna go, they get back to their car and they leave. So what we wanna try and do is we wanna try and create an environment in the downtown that creates a pedestrian-friendly environment where people are out stopping in shops, where they're out spending their money. By bringing in these additional bodies into the downtown and helping with economic redevelopment is you're also bringing individuals who are going to be spending money in the downtown. So you're increasing the sales tax base, you're increasing the property tax base. There's a huge amount of commercial activity that would be generated with the construction of these new 700 units and also with the downtown spending. Can we get the next slide,
Can we
please?
do a motion to seat Alderman Felix?
So moved.
Okay, all those in favor?
Need a first and a second on that, but that's fine.
I thought there was first and second. Okay, I'm sorry. I should have read them out.
We good? Okay. So this is the site overview. And the red area is the redevelopment corridor. That's the Genesee corridor. On the left side of the corridor, you see CHSP. That stands for Courthouse Square Park, and I'll touch on that in a second. And then off to the right is the capped park, which is currently part of the city's plans to connect the downtown to the lakefront. And one of the things in contemplating how to go about this redevelopment was taking into account the lakefront. The long-term goals for the city is to redevelop the lakefront. However, redeveloping the lakefront is going to be very challenging if we don't redevelop the downtown area, which we call the core. In order to have a vibrant lakefront community, it needs to be backed essentially by the core, which is the spine of the downtown. And how do you go about doing that? So in addition to repopulating, you also have to create additional amenities. Can we get the next slide, please? So within the revitalization corridor, these are the 10 sites that we have identified that are ready for redevelopment. Courthouse Square Park is at the top, and we'll continue to get into that. This just gives you a brief overview of what we're looking at along the corridor. Can I get the next slide, please? Within that redevelopment corridor, right now what we're focusing on is phase one. Phase one actually is right across the street from where we're at. Courthouse Square Park, back in the day, there used to be a park across the street. It was across from the original courthouse, which was in this area. And then at one point in time, the county built a parking garage on the park. Part of our plan is to restore Courthouse Square Park as a new city center for the community, and then also build and develop around that new city center. Within phase one here, this is just right across the street from us here. We have the former YMCA building, which we're looking to do 19 new 1 to 2 bedroom units in there, 6,700 square feet of retail. We are looking to do LGBTQ inclusive housing on what is currently known as parking lot B, number 2 on the map. And then number 3 would also be part of Courthouse Square Commons, which would be 212 Madison, 65 to 100 new 1 to 2 bedroom units, and about 10,000 square feet of retail. And then number 4 is the corner of Madison and Genesee, that's 38 North Genesee, and that is 6 new units, 1 to 2 bedroom residential units with 3,000 square feet of space. Can I get the next slide, please? So with the revitalization of Courthouse Square Park, it's going to create an inviting open space concept for what we envision to be the new downtown. And this can be a focal point for a lot of the employees that live, a lot of the employees that work in downtown, and then also for the residents. You know, Waukegan has a number of people that work in the downtown on a daily basis, but just given the structure of the buildings they work in, you know, there isn't much opportunity for them to go out and on their lunch break and go to the park, go to the local sandwich shop, get something to eat, go sit in the park. We believe that this would be a critical community asset to restore this park that once was there. Can I get the next slide, please? So around the park would be what we are calling Courthouse Square Park and Commons, and it's the creation of the new city center. Can I get the next slide, please? What we envision is the creation of innovative market space, specifically along County there, which would lend to open air markets, it would lend to live workspace, it would lend to food truck corridors. One of the things that we learned coming out of the pandemic was how many people now have adjusted to working from their home, and being able to provide live workspace, I think, is critical. I think that's the direction that we are heading in this country. We're going to start to see more live work, but also by providing live workspace within Courthouse Square Commons and the structures that are associated with it, is you provide somebody, in many cases entrepreneurs, who don't necessarily have the capital to open up their own storefront, to be able to have that storefront from the place that they're living in. This concept has been piloted throughout the country. There are some great examples of that here in the Chicagoland area, and it really achieves the objective of making it affordable for entrepreneurs to open up their own storefront and their own business. Can I get the next slide, please? So this gives you a quick overview and a bird's eye view of where we're at. You can see the City Hall there in the back. Courthouse Square Commons there in the blue and the light blue across from Courthouse Square Park. And then off to the right, you've got the historic YMCA building. And then down in the left corner, you have 38 North Genesee, which is all part of phase 1 of the overall redevelopment proposal. Can I get the next slide, please? So this is currently 212 West Madison. We're looking to do an adaptive reuse. This is just to the south of parking lot B. And what we do an adaptive reuse to build residential, build apartments above, and then also retrofit some of the existing parking garage there and that building into about an additional 10,000 square feet of commercial space. Can I get the next slide, please? On parking lot B, we are proposing an LGBTQ plus inclusive housing development. One of the things that we've seen nationally is the migration of LGBTQ individuals out of states and communities that are passing laws and ordinances that are not equitable and put LGBTQ families at risk. We are seeing actually an influx in the state of Illinois of LGBTQ individuals and families coming here. Waukegan's got a great reputation as an inclusive and diverse community, and we think that this would be a great addition to the downtown and help add to the diverse fabric of the downtown. Let's jump to the next slide here. So what we want to really talk about today are 2 properties within phase 1. The other properties in the development zone that we've discussed, that is still, you know, we're still working with staff on a number of those components. But right now, what we want to focus on is the YMCA building, and I want to talk about that for a second. The YMCA building is currently vacant. It's been vacant for a little over 10 years. It does have a boxing gym there. And what we want to do is we want to put in 19 new residential units there. We have room to create about 6,700 square feet of new commercial retail space. This is also where we want to put a bank. One of the services that, you know, downtown Waukegan no longer has is a functioning bank or financial institution. In order to start to attract bodies and bring people back into the downtown, not only through the creation of additional residential units, you have to provide the amenities as needed. So we also want to locate a bank there on the first floor of the YMCA building, but then also use the additional space for shared workspace and a fitness center. We are envisioning that the amenities provided out of the YMCA building would also be provided, they would be accessible to any resident living in the Courthouse Square Commons development. Can we go back one? Sorry. So we are projecting the total cost to rehabilitate that building at roughly $3.7 million. What we're looking for in gap funding is about 1.8. One of the challenges that we face in the downtown area is that there is a structural deficiency in between what we can get in rent versus covering the debt load. And this is a challenge that, that needs to be overcome in order to make many of these projects viable. Can we get the final slide, please? And then the second property that we wanted to specifically discuss with you is on 38 North Genesee. So we would be also in a vacant building. We want to rehabilitate that into 6 new residential units and reactivate the hard corner commercial area there. We are in negotiations right now with a cafe who is very interested in opening up there to do a cafe and restaurant, and they would go on to the first floor there. Our projected cost for that is about $1.65 million. We would be looking for about $850,000 in gap funding for that project. One of the reasons that we really wanted to have this dialogue tonight about the YMCA building and about 38 North Genesee is because we do have some contractual obligations and timelines that we do need to meet, which is important. You know, these are important assets that need to get redeveloped within the corridor. And in the absence of achieving those contractual deadlines, we will lose site control of those properties, and I'm not sure when or if they would become available again. I am happy to answer any questions any of you may have.
Alderman Florian?
Alderman Hayes can go first.
Okay, Alderman Hayes.
Okay, thanks for that. A couple of questions for you about both buildings in the plan generally, but you just finished with 38 North Genesee. You're saying create 3,000 square feet of new commercial space. So you're going to create additional commercial space in addition to what's already there? Or you're just going to reuse that first
Reactivate.
floor, what was formerly a restaurant, right?
Yeah, so there's 3,000 square feet there. It's empty. We want to reactivate that 3,000 square feet of space.
And that's where you're saying that a cafe is interested in going in, right?
Correct.
As it relates to this building and the YMCA building, do you plan to have to pre-lease the commercial space before construction takes place?
We are in the process of negotiating with potential users. We can't execute necessarily a lease
Sure.
without control of it. But yes, there are negotiations going on with users.
For the YMCA building, are you planning to open up? I mean, that first floor, how does that first floor commercial, how does that change visually?
Can you see the photo here?
Yep.
All right, so if you look at the main entrance, which is off of County there, you walk in there, and there's the whole first floor is open, but it's already somewhat segregated into different spaces. So what we would do is we would just further delineate those spaces and make them accessible from the outside for public use using that main entrance there on County.
So there's the main entrance, but you'll have other entrances into each of the individual spaces from County Street, or will you have to go through the main entrance to then go into the individual
So when you walk in off of County Street, it's right now it's like a vestibule, if you will. And then you can go in different directions. We're looking to put the bank to the left, shared workspace to the right, and then the door that would be in front of you would be for the residents to go up to their apartments.
I see. I don't know this. Sam, you might know this after the presentation last week. Is this building under any sort of historical preservation restrictions?
I'm sorry, you asking me?
No, not that
You
Sam.
might know. Yeah.
The other Sam. Our
Oh,
Sam.
you're Sam too. Forgive me. Yes.
It is. It's a local landmark. It's on the National Register of Historic Places. It just means that if they make any changes to the exterior of the building, it would need to go before the Historic Preservation Commission.
Yep. Okay.
Inside is not covered by local landmarking, no.
In both the YMCA and the 38 North Genesee, we would be looking projects to start in July, as soon as possible.
Okay. You own both properties? Or do you own 38 North Genesee already?
No, not right now. We have contractual agreements in place.
Okay. Which is why I haven't seen it listed for a while. It was listed for a little bit. It was removed, huh? Okay. All right, thank you.
Florian?
Thank you, Mayor. So that was going to be one of my questions is do you own these properties? So the real answer is no, you don't own them yet.
We have contractual agreements.
Okay, I guess
But we don't
I don't
outright own
understand
them.
what that means. I'm a chiropractor, not a
Oh,
developer.
I'm sorry. So we have a contractual agreement with the property owner, and but we have certain metrics that we have to meet in order to close and take custody of the property.
Okay, got it. Thank you. He's the lawyer, not me, so. So as mentioned earlier, I have some concerns about the LGBTQT housing, although I think that's a great idea in concept. I'm concerned that somehow that'll be kind of almost like a reverse discrimination in some ways. Like I wouldn't be able to rent there, for instance.
Oh,
but
no, we can't discriminate against tenants. It would be an LGBTQ-focused residential facility or residential apartment building.
Okay. Do these exist anywhere else?
Yeah, actually, one of our partners just did one in Chicago.
Okay.
And one of the challenges right now that the LGBTQ community is facing is, we've made a lot of progress in terms of equality across the country, but there still is a lot of discrimination going on right now towards the LGBTQ community, and especially with the heated political rhetoric that we're seeing nationally right now. So there is a degree of vulnerability within that community. By providing an opportunity for LGBTQ individuals to live in the same area, to live in the same building, let's say, there is a sense of security on that front as well. But it is, it's clearly open to anyone, but it will, we're looking to make it LGBTQ focused.
So just, I think this is useful because we did get one public question about this and what that means. It doesn't mean that it's a requirement. It doesn't necessarily mean, does it mean preference, or does it mean basically communities and how it's marketed to, and what does inclusive mean when you are developing and trying to get to full tenancy of this project?
Say that last part again. I'm sorry, sir.
You're trying to get people to rent in this project. What does that actually mean?
So marketing towards LGBTQ individuals who are looking to locate into a downtown area, an urbanized area. You have many LGBTQ individuals in the suburbs that would be interested in living in a vibrant downtown area, but also living with people of their same demographic.
There's no questionnaire, and there's
no questionnaire.
There's no affidavits that have to be filled out.
There's no questionnaire. There's no test.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that, Stu. Okay, so that, I think I'm clear on that. So the Courthouse Square Park, isn't that where the current parking garage is?
That is correct.
So, like, the county owns that?
That is correct.
So, what does that look like? Like, you plan on buying it? There's a lot of cars parked there. I made sure I looked when I was here today upstairs.
Yeah.
It's almost full.
Yeah. So if that is the direction that the city council would like to go to reinstate that park, then we would engage with the county on that. But obviously, we would, we want to make sure that that is the direction that the city council would want to go.
Okay. And then, sorry, I didn't do my homework like I should have. 212 Madison Street, what's there now?
So that's the former First Midwest Bank building.
Okay, and isn't that the parking lot the school district is going to use for their excess parking?
The parking garage, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's complicated a little bit, I think, but that's down the road. That's not in this initial presentation. And then I have one last question. You mentioned, well, actually I have two. You mentioned business incubation. I don't remember what slide it was on, but about the city partnering with you and doing, so what does that look like? Where's the funding for something like that come from?
So we envision that being part of a business model in conjunction with any funding that we would be able to secure from the city. And what that looks like, there's other communities who have done similar models with this, where let's say you want to open up a shop, 1,000 square foot shop, but because of the capital intensity of opening up a shop for yourself, is that for many cases, it's not achievable for people. So we would be looking at providing some sort of incentive for discounted rent to help these businesses get started, to bring businesses into the downtown, to start rebuilding that tax base and providing opportunities for people to spend money and generate sales tax.
So
Can I ask a quick question about that? So that's a TI for the tenant, and then you get paid back the rent you're not collecting from the TIF, in
Yes,
theory?
it would be, yes, that is one way it could work, yes.
And then my last question, I think, is about the 70,000 square feet of commercial retail space, the overall. So we struggle, you know that. That's one of the reasons you're wanting to do this. So is the idea that by bringing in more residents, it's going to automatically create the demand for more retail?
That is correct. Bringing in more bodies, more consumers into the downtown is going to just naturally generate more economic activity and the need for more economic development. Interestingly enough, you know, in many conversations that we've had with various interested parties over the past year, everyone not everyone, but a large number of people in the development community all say the same thing. Downtown Waukegan has so much potential, but I don't want to be the first person in. And that's, you know, a struggle that we face. So with our proposal, with creating 700 new units, you hit a point of critical mass where you now have an influx of population coming in. You have units in downtown, and that is going to attract additional development and other developers to come in, because we're going to clear that major hurdle of it has potential, but I don't want to be the first person there.
Okay, I lied. I do have one more
Sure.
question.
Wait, Alderman Florian, Alderman Newsom had questions first, then I'll come back to you. Oh, okay. Can I let Alderman Newsom go first, and then I'll come back, and then we'll go back to you, Alderman Florian.
I just have a few questions. Your gap funding that you're looking for, are you looking for that upfront, or do you have your own financing?
We would be looking for that up front. In order to secure financing for the two projects at the end of the slideshow here, the YMCA and the 38 North Genesee, we would be looking for that contribution up front. One of the challenges is it's not bankable, if you will, with the amount of revenue that the building would create versus the amount of debt load that it would have to carry in the absence of that gap funding up front. And we are certainly open to working with staff and the city's financial consultants to develop a pathway forward on that, but that's generally what we're thinking right now.
I have another question. Have you, you all done other developments that are prosperous that we can look at?
Yeah, we all bring strengths to the table. We all have done our own individual developments. One of our partners, Mickey Shook here, has done a number of projects here in the Waukegan area. Our partner, Metropolitan Housing, does a lot of new construction of apartment buildings. So we do have quite a vast portfolio.
And my last question is, you said 700 units?
Correct.
Are you integrating parking in that for these residential?
That is correct. So there will be integrated parking into a lot of the new construction. That is something that we're looking to do. But we also want to be cognizant of the fact that we want people out and about in the downtown. We don't want people just to pull their car into the garage, go up to their apartment, and just stay there, and then, you know, go back down to their car and drive to work and never do anything in downtown. Yes, there will be parking available, but we also want to be cognizant of the fact that we don't want to create a downtown area of just parking lots for people to not have to interact with the community. We really want to create a much more pedestrian-driven downtown.
I understand that, no surface parking, but like the old YMCA building, there's no parking.
There's no parking.
So are you going to integrate parking in that building, underground or overground, whatever?
So one of the things that we've been having discussions with staff about is to utilize the city's parking garage across the street for the residents in the Y building.
Is that going to be enough parking?
Yeah, I think there's ample volume of space in the city's parking garage there to accommodate about 19 new units.
And then once we do that, what are we going to do with the Genesee Park, Genesee Theater when they have their events?
So well, and that's something that we can have a discussion with staff about. Right now, that's what we're envisioning.
Okay, Alderman Martinez?
Yeah, actually, I had two questions, but Alderman Newsom, my concern was they're going to attract people downtown, but the parking issue, but you already answered that. My second question is, how are you going to market this out in the community, out in the different areas to attract people downtown to want to be part of this?
Downtown Waukegan's, it's a cool space. I mean, it's a cool place to be. One of the challenges is that there just simply are not enough residential units. So in terms of marketing it to individuals, there's a variety of different avenues, especially with digital avenues in terms of marketing properties to tenants. I'm very confident, as are the other members of the team very confident, that people will come to downtown Waukegan.
Alderman Felix?
You had a few questions. Regarding the parking, the Lake County parking, and I did meet with you guys, and you guys went over everything as well. I remember you mentioning that the Lake County themselves are looking to turn some of their actual, or they have like a program where they want to turn their properties into greenery or something like that. Is that something like a
Yeah, the county recently adopted a position where they want to see the conversion of a lot of they want to see the creation of more green space from existing structures. So they actually sent out a survey requesting input from the community as to where they think that they can invest money to create more green space within the county, outside and free of the forest preserve.
So I just wanted to bring that up because even we're wondering how does that look like? Like there is conversations out there to do these kind of things for more green space, and so definitely would like to see more green space in our area. And like we said, we like you pointed out, we have a parking garage that needs to be utilized. It's really not utilized as how it should. But one thing I did want to ask, do we know the number of parking spaces we have in the garage, Noel?
You don't know the number?
I don't know it.
It's just under 700, 690 something.
Okay. So as you guys can see, I mean, there shouldn't be any issues with parking. And within everything, from what I see, it's 4 or 5 minutes walk for almost all of our city staff, county staff. We just want to make sure we like Sam said, we're wanting our people to move around around the area so we can have that economic activity. So definitely like that idea. Did have a question for that you mentioned the parking for the school. Do we have some kind of contract that they're going to be using that the district?
As part of the conditional use permit for the school facility, they were required to contract for parking, and they have a lease agreement for the lower level of that parking facility.
Okay. I want to make sure. That's the only questions for now for me.
Okay, before I go back to Alderman Florian, there was one quick question that we just discussed, and I can't remember it now. Is this market rate at YMCA?
Yes, what we are proposing is all market rate.
Alderman Turner? Oh, yeah.
Thank you. I keep going back to your targeted marketing for a particular demographic. Why not just market to anybody who can afford it? And because when you're marketing to a specific demographic, you're doing that to the exclusion of other demographics, which lends itself to discrimination and segregation.
I think, and I understand what you're saying, and I agree with you 100%. I think it's a matter of communicating that this is a friendly and safe place for you to live. You don't have to worry about facing any sort of discriminatory policies that you might face living elsewhere. You don't have to worry about living in an unsafe area. So in terms of communicating that, I think that's very positive thing for people to know when they're moving into a new building specifically.
Well, wouldn't that apply
actually,
to the
you know-
wouldn't that apply to the general public? I mean, to anybody. If I want to move down there, I'd like to know the same
Hi.
things. It's a safe area, et cetera, et cetera.
Hi, I'm Rich Gonzalez. I'm with Metropolitan Housing. I just wanted to kind of clarify. We have a project very similar like this in Chicago. And I think what we need to focus on is the word inclusive, which is the opposite of exclusive. So all we're saying is you're welcomed here, not that you're the only one that can live here. So inclusive means you too are welcome to live here. And I think that's kind of where we want to concentrate. It's an inclusive housing, not an exclusive housing.
Why mention it at all? That's what I'm getting at. By mentioning it at all. If we're all treated equally, there's no need to mention it. So by default, it should be just equal for everyone.
Women are
we
still
not?
not treated equal. Do you know how much money women make on the dollar to men? About 84 cents.
You know how much more men work than women?
That's a different.
Let's move on, because we have limited time here.
So the idea is that the idea is that this is a LGBTQ friendly, and every place should be, but sometimes they need to hear that, and it works so well for us in Chicago.
Maybe it's just a matter of rewording it.
And it could be if that's an issue, yes. So we could just do that and reword.
And just to, I wanted to say, we're just looking for a market, like a way to market to everyone, like you said, be inclusive, right? So at the same time, we can also market, hey, you know, to different communities. But what you're wanting to say is that you have a safe space here. You know, you could be from this community or that community.
Which is what we did with the Karcher.
Yep.
For artists.
And that's why we use the word inclusive, just so that they understood
If I can also say, and I think, and I'm just assuming, but I think that why you guys chose the LBG community is because we are a community that accepts, we are a diverse community. We do, I think we're the only town in Lake County that has pride flags 8 months of a year.
And sometimes the LGBTQ community has to be invited to understand that, hey, we accept everybody. We're good with that. And this kind of makes them feel, it's not limited to them, but it's certainly open arms for them.
Well, I think that's a clever move to do that. Not only that, but very welcome too. So.
I'm going to go back to Alderman Florian.
Thank you, Mayor. I just messaged one of my friends on the county board, and she said she doesn't know of any plan to convert to green spaces, but we'll see about that. That's down the road. But I also had a question, comparing the YMCA building to the little tiny restaurant-y building. So it's going to cost you about, I just did this quickly, but about $266,000 a unit for the small building and only $194,000 for the big building. Why is the little building so expensive?
You hit essentially savings in volume. So when you're looking at a 19-unit building versus a 6-unit building, naturally, the fewer the units you have a number of fixed costs that have to go in regardless. So those fixed costs remain the same in each building, but because you only have 6 units, that fixed cost is disproportionately higher on buildings with fewer numbers of units.
So are you going to make your money back by charging more rent for those than you would for the?
Well, and that's where the gap funding comes in, is because right now, even at market rate rents, is that there's still a structural deficiency between what can be generated from the market and covering the debt load as well. So that's how these numbers were put together.
Alderman Hayes.
This might just stem from my rudimentary understanding of TIFs, but how do we verify that your total cost will be 1.6 and that you need $850,000 in gap funding?
So I don't want to speak for the city, maybe Noel is, it would have to be approved by the city and financial consultants.
Okay, so we're going to see.
I don't want to speak for the city, I don't want to say what you guys are going to do, but generally speaking, yes, the numbers would be submitted to the city for their review with their financial consultants.
Okay, and they'd be verified. There would be bids that had been submitted to back up the numbers, and we would know that all of those costs are tied back to something, right?
Yes, that's how it's been handled in other projects we've done with cities before. I would assume it would probably be a very similar process.
Okay, and we know that any funding from the city will not be used, well, forgive me, can it be used to acquire an existing building? Okay, so you could use some of the gap funding to acquire, let's say this building cost you about $500,000, which I think is what it was listed for. So that funds could be used to acquire the building.
That is correct,
Okay.
yes.
So Alderman Hayes, if it would be helpful just for me to give like a 30-second aside, the way normally when a project is approved for TIF funding, there is a redevelopment agreement. That redevelopment agreement would take into account and usually describe what the reimbursable redevelopment costs would be. And those would be based on analysis and study that would be done by the city's financial consultant, which is SB Friedman, which has already started doing some initial work on the numbers that have been presented by the developer. As they get into more work and start getting deeper in, those costs would be either reimbursed out of the TIF fund or reimbursed directly from the developer.
Okay, that's helpful, thank you. What I was thinking in my mind is it'd be a shame to see a balloon number for like a GC fee that we can't really tie to anything, and it's just a contractor's fee that isn't tied to any hard material costs or anything like that.
Right.
And I want to avoid a scenario where somebody's just putting money in their pockets as a GC fee as opposed to money that's actually going into the building
Completely understandable.
tangibly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Alderman Newsome?
One more question. Have you done a study on the viability or whatever for the units that you plan on having downtown Waukegan, or the structures that you plan on building later? I remember sitting here when an organization came and wanted to build on a lot down here, and they had to have a certain amount of units sold prior to starting construction, and, you know, had the city really involved, and just went kaput. So how are you going to be marketing so that we know that if the city is supposed to give upfront gap money, that this program is going to come to fruition for the city of Waukegan?
That's a great question. So right now, based upon studies that were done, the downtown area can immediately, tomorrow, handle 500 units. That's tomorrow. Now, when you look at the development schedule, we're talking about a development schedule that is 3-5 years out. So we also have to take into account, too, is that we have a massive housing shortage in the United States. Just in the Chicagoland area, we're short about 1 million units. So there is a demand, there's already demand for those units, and we know that tomorrow the downtown could handle an additional 500 units. One of the other things, too, is that the Lake County Partners recently commissioned a housing study for all of Lake County, which basically reinforces that data.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Mayor, I have one more question.
Okay, and then we're ending this at 8 o'clock.
I know,
Okay.
it's only, I got 7 minutes.
You got
It's not
7
going to
minutes.
take 7 minutes. So just to clarify what you said earlier, I know Mickey's done work, I know you've done work, but this group has never done a project together.
Correct. We are a consortium, yes.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question.
Alderman Martinez?
So my question is there another municipality or another city that you can say that where the TIF was initiated? Is there a city you could say this is an example of what TIF has done for that city?
I can cite some examples. Stu, is there anything that you think would be relevant here?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we could do is, especially with Greg and I, could pull, so TIF is used all over the place, but I think the question, Alderman Martinez, you're asking is there a comparable municipality that has a downtown kind of facing the same challenges where they've successfully seen this be implemented on this scale for these types of uses? And I think that one of the things we can actually reach out to SB Friedman, which is our financial consultant, who does this work throughout Chicago and actually nationwide, and provide you with examples of where it's worked and maybe even where it's not worked. And so you can kind of maybe see some cautionary tales. So I think that that's information that we can definitely bring back to you, and you can kind of compare and contrast it. When Noel brought up the city's TIF policy, many of those are all to the city. In some ways, they're more permissive, and in some ways, they're more conservative than what other communities use. There are some communities that will absolutely not use TIF for residential. There are other ones that absolutely want to encourage residential using TIF. And so I think that one thing that would be useful for us, or useful for you, is for us to kind of bring back maybe some more background on that. And if you have other questions, you can always, we can maybe over the next week, if you have other questions, you can submit them to me. I'll give you Greg's contact information as well, and we can bring back some of that perspective.
Can I ask just one more question?
Yes, this will be the final question.
So Noel said our policy was no upfront money. They're asking for upfront money. So how does?
That would have to be your decision as a council.
Yeah, that policy has been a staff policy since about 2011, and you know what the decisions that you would make is have things changed significantly or not changed, and such that you would like to either stick with that or revisit it, or look for more input on it. It's not an ordinance, I'll say that. And Noel's not killing me for saying that.
You could make it one, but right now it's not one. Okay, we'll put it that way. Okay. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
Thank you very much.
Second.
Motion.
Okay, so
First was
Hayes,
Alderman
second
Newsom.
was Florian, no, Hayes
Oh.
and Florian.
And I'd just like to clarify, the article Alderman Turner sent me says women work less hours, but research shows women work harder.
Okay,
there's that.
I'm not getting into that.
Okay, so hold
Okay,
on.
Alderman Hayes and second was Alderman Florian. All
Okay.
those in favor?
Well, right.
Any opposed? Thank you, everyone, for being here this evening.